Okay, and... what is up, everyone? Prometheus here. Today I'd like to talk about something that's been in my mind for quite a while now. So, today I'd like to talk about a revelation I've had. So, as you know me, I love cinema, but I also love books. In fact, I myself am an aspiring fantasy writer. I am not yet to publish something, but I'm currently working on my own fantasy series, the Grandmaster Mythos, as you can see I have a map there, as well as my absolute gore fest of a fantasy novel, the Saga of Aros, which will make Game of Thrones look like a absolute tea party, make it look like a fairy tale. But the two novel series that inspired me to start writing is The Lord of the Rings. Obviously, that's the start for many authors. But as much as I love Lord of the Rings is my favorite media franchise overall. But there is a fantasy novel series that I like even more than Lord of the Rings. And that series is, if you saw the title of this video, that series is, of course, the Stormlight Archive. Brandon Sanderson is my idol when it comes to fantasy writing, and I believe he's the greatest author, not only of our time, but possibly even the greatest author of all time, period. The Way of Kings, Words of Radiance, Oathbringer, I'm yet to read Rhythm of War and his upcoming Wind and Truth. That's because they're really big novels, and I only started reading them a year or two ago. But yeah, it was Christmas season, I got my hands on The Way of Kings, read it, and man, the entirety of this book is better than the entire Lord of the Rings trilogy. I know, Lord of the Rings, both the Lord of the Rings movie and book trilogy. That just speaks to how great they are, because I think the Lord of the Rings book trilogy and movie trilogy are both some of the greatest pieces of fantasy media ever. But the Stormlight Archive is the greatest piece of fantasy media ever. Way of Kings was great. Words of Radiance is the greatest novel of all time. Oathbringer is still really good. Rhythm of War I hear is good, and his upcoming Wind of Truth is also getting pretty good reviews on Goodreads. Now, Brandon Sanderson's my favorite author, but who's my favorite movie director? Well, if you saw this, my favorite movie director is Denis Villeneuve. Denis Villeneuve. Denis Villeneuve. That doesn't sound right. Cut. Okay, my favorite movie director is Denis Villeneuve, who is also a fellow Canadian like me. He's a French Canadian. I'm also French. I don't live in Quebec, though, because I don't know how to speak French, unfortunately. But he is my favorite movie director. And him and Brandon Sanderson are my favorite artists. Favorite artists in all of media. And they both created some of my favorite media franchises. I am a huge fan of Dune. The book, I was first introduced to Dune through David Lynch's movie, surprisingly, instead of Denis Villeneuve's Dune. But then I watched Dune Part 1 in 2021, and it was the best sci-fi film I had ever seen. Fantastic. I thought it should have won Best Picture. And then Dune Part 2 came along. And man, it is one of the greatest sci-fi films I've ever seen. And this is gonna be a hot take, but I think it's better than The Empire Strikes Back. Yeah, and him saying that he's gonna be making Dune Messiah better than Dune Part 2 makes me so excited for Messiah, because that means Messiah could potentially be the greatest movie ever made. Because Dune Part 2 is one of my top 20 movies of all time. Another standout is Blade Runner 2049. And yeah, fantastic. I love the Dune movie franchise. Lord of the Rings is my favorite movie franchise. And Brandon Sanderson's Stormlight Archive is my favorite novel series. And today I'd like to talk about both of them, because the reason why Stormlight Archive isn't my absolute favorite media franchise, is because it's only confined to the books. There hasn't been any video games, movies, or series yet. That's what I'd like to talk about, though, because I've heard Brandon Sanderson, who I watch a lot, talk about how he's looking to get his books adapted into movies, series, video games, and I think it could work really well. But he's yet to have anything like concrete set in place. Well, today, Brandon, if you're watching this, and I hope somehow he finds this video and watches it, because I think this recommendation could help him create the definitive fantasy series, because the Stormlight Archive is a series that cannot be adapted into movies. It should be adapted into a TV series. Yeah, fantasy TV series. Now, I'm sure he probably won't let his Stormlight Archives fall into the hands of Amazon after what they did with Lord of the Rings. Yeesh. I don't think Netflix would be the best choice either. Maybe the producers of Game of Thrones could work if they don't do what they did with season 8, hopefully. But they've picked themselves back up with the House of Dragon. But anyways, yeah, fantasy TV recently hasn't been the best. Like, sure, we've gone House of Dragons, Vox Machina, which is fantastic. Why watch Rings of Power when you could watch Vox Machina? But then there was Rings of Power, which sucks. The Witcher series isn't the best, and yeah, fantasy TV hasn't been the best. But Brandon Sanderson, if you are watching this, and somehow, like my viewers, if you're watching this, somehow find a way to get this into the hands of Brandon Sanderson and maybe even Denis Villeneuve, so that they could consider this offer, because I think this idea could create the greatest TV series of all time. Better than Game of Thrones, better than Breaking Bad, better than The Sopranos, better than Seinfeld, MASH, and all the other greatest TV series. Brandon Sanderson should collaborate with Denis Villeneuve and have him adapt the Stormlight Archives into a TV series. Now, I know what you're thinking, but Denis Villeneuve, he directs sci-fi movies. Yeah, but that's the thing. Well, Stormlight Archive is fantasy. It has the world of Roshar has kind of a alien feeling to it, and that's why I think Denis Villeneuve would be perfect for it. His visual style with combine that with the cinematographer for the Dune movies. I forgot his name, but he's a fantastic cinematographer. Just take Brandon Sanderson, have him like maybe be the writer of the film, have the producers of the Game of Thrones help produce it, have Denis Villeneuve direct the series, have the cinematographer from Dune do the cinematography, have maybe Howard Shore or even Hans Zimmer, maybe even have Hans Zimmer and Howard Shore collaborate to make the soundtrack, and boom, you have one of the greatest pieces of media ever. So here's what I think. Brandon Sanderson, reach out to Denis Villeneuve, or Denis Villeneuve, reach out to Brandon Sanderson and make that offer to make a Stormlight Archive TV series directed by Denis Villeneuve, because I think the visual style of like some of his films like Dune and Blade Runner 2049 could work with the dash of like Lord of the Rings and Game of Thrones maybe added into it, but then at the same time the world of the Stormlight Archive is so unique and it feels alien, and I think like all the storms and stuff would be great for like Denis Villeneuve to adapt, because this potential Stormlight Archive series would need a lot of CGI, because you can't pull a lot of that stuff off with like practical effects. Like, still shoot on location, but you still might need a lot of CGI. Thankfully, Denis Villeneuve has some really good CGI in his films. And I think if he makes this Brandon Sanderson's Stormlight Archives into a TV series, like work one season at a time, maybe each book could be a season, like Way of Kings is season 1, Words of Radiance season 2, Oathbringer season 3, and I know Brando Sando, isn't done the series yet. He's planning on making like 10 of them. He's not even halfway done yet, but seeing how he writes so fast, I'm sure he's gonna make some progress. But yeah, as he writes the book, they can also work on the series. So the visual style of Denis Villeneuve is unique. It feels fantastical. It feels otherworldly, and that's why I think he'd be perfect for the Stormlight Archive, because Roshar feels otherworldly. Denis Villeneuve's filmmaking feels otherworldly. The way he directs would be perfect for a grand scale adventure in a Stormlight Archive series. The battles, the scenes, I think the way he has his, like, the direction, how he builds tension, suspense, has a sense of grandeur, like a sense of just epicness. I don't even know if epicness is the word, but he has a sense of just epic filmmaking, a sense of just a grand world, a grand fantastical alien world that he would perfectly do. Like, Denis Villeneuve would more than do justice for the Stormlight Archive if he adapted it. Like I think Peter Jackson could work, but I think Denis Villeneuve would be perfect because his filmmaking feels grand and epic, and it feels alien. And these books feel alien. They feel unique from the Lord of the Rings, because Stormlight Archive is fantasy, but it's a lot different from Lord of the Rings. It's more alien, has more, like, the high storms, all these weird magic things. I think Denis Villeneuve would be able to perfectly adapt that. So, Brandon Sanderson, if you're watching this and you want to adapt Stormlight Archive into a series, grab your phone, dial up Denis Villeneuve, make a deal with him, and boom, you got one of the greatest fantasy series, the greatest piece of fantasy media ever, the greatest novel adaptation ever, the greatest TV show ever made in the works. Like, the Stormlight Archives TV series would be my favorite piece of media ever if it ends up being great. And like, there's so many good actors that could be cast as the characters as well. Like, yeah. If you're, like, so, Brandon Sanderson, you're watching this. You're interested in making this into a series? Dial up Denis Villeneuve, and you got yourself a fantastic deal on your hands that will do more than do justice for your series. It's a great series, but with Denis Villeneuve, the adaptations could maybe even be better than the books. Like, the books are still some of the greatest novels ever written, but with Denis Villeneuve, combine that with Denis Villeneuve, and you could create one of the greatest pieces of media ever with the Stormlight Archive TV series. And I would absolutely rewatch it more than Lord of the Rings trilogy. Like, I don't care if it's 10 seasons long and each episodes are like nearly an hour long and it's gonna like take up months. I'm gonna rewatch this series dozens, like 5 times a year, like 5-10 times a year. I already watched the Lord of the Rings trilogy 12 to 15 times a year. They're my second favorite piece of media ever. I'll reveal my favorite piece of media ever but in a later video. But yeah, Denis Villeneuve, my favorite director, and Brandon Sanderson, my favorite author. You guys have created some of the greatest forms of art of the modern day. Brandon Sanderson is the best modern book director and one of the greatest book writers, authors, and one of the best authors of all time. Denis Villeneuve has already established himself as not only the best director working in the business now, well, I guess he could be tied with Nolan, but he's one of the greatest directors of all time, the modern day Stanley Kubrick. He has not created a single bad movie, like how Brandon Sanderson hasn't really made a single bad book. I haven't read all his books, but from how great the Stormlight Archive is, I don't really see much fault in his writing. And combine these two artists together, and you have an adaptation of the greatest novel series of all time, made into the greatest TV series of all time, and the greatest piece of fantasy media ever. One that people would maybe could be even more beloved than the Lord of the Rings trilogy. And I know that Sanderson's wanting to adapt Mistborn into a movie trilogy. And you know what? I think Denis Villeneuve could be great for that too. You know what, Brandon? You want to adapt Mistborn? Get Denis Villeneuve and he can adapt Mistborn as well. And boom, the Mistborn trilogy is the modern day Lord of the Rings trilogy. One of possibly even the greatest movie trilogy ever. Like, there is so much potential, and I think pairing Denis Villeneuve, Brandon Sanderson, and some really good production value and actors and CGI shot on location, and you have one of the greatest TV show ever. So, if you think there's a different person that would be good to adapt Stormlight Archive, comment that down, but I am confident that Denis Villeneuve would be perfect for that. Brando Sando, you're watching this? Please consider this. It might give you some ideas. And Denis Villeneuve, you're watching this? Fantastic director. I admire you. I respect you just as much as I respect Brandon Sanderson, you two are my favorite artists. And I think you two would work perfectly together to make an adaptation of this fantastic series. So, yeah, that's what I gotta say. Adapt Denis Villeneuve and Brandon Sanderson adapt Stormlight Archive, and you got yourself a masterpiece on your hand.